The dust had barely settled on the trail when Yates Ashford found her crumpled beside the old water pump at the edge of his property, her dress torn and her face streaked with dried tears. He had been riding back from checking the fence line on his ranch outside Presidio, Texas, when his horse suddenly balked. Ears pricked forward at something lying in the shade of the lone cottonwood tree that marked the boundary of his land. At first he thought it might be an injured animal, but as he drew closer, his heart seized in his chest. It was a woman, young and clearly with child, unconscious and pale as moonlight. Yates dismounted in one swift motion, his boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a thud that sent up a small cloud of dust. He knelt beside her, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he checked for a pulse at her throat. It was there, faint but steady, and he released a breath he had not realized he was holding. The woman was beautiful despite her obvious distress, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and skin that looked as though it had not seen water or care in days. Her belly was round and unmistakable beneath the faded fabric of her dress, and Yates felt a surge of anger at whoever had left her in such a state. He scooped her up carefully, mindful of her condition, and was struck by how light she felt in his arms, as though she had not eaten properly in weeks. His horse, a steady bay gelding named Copper, stood patiently as Yates managed to mount with the woman cradled against his chest. The ranch house was only a quarter-mile away, but it felt like the longest ride of his life as he kept glancing down to make sure she was still breathing. The September heat of 1874 bore down on them mercilessly as Yates kicked Copper into a faster walk. Presidio sat on the border with Mexico, and the late summer sun showed no mercy to anyone foolish enough to be out in the middle of the day. Yates felt sweat trickle down his back beneath his worn cotton shirt, but his focus remained on the woman in his arms. She stirred once, a soft moan escaping her lips, but did not wake. When they finally reached the house, Yates called out for his housekeeper, Maria, a woman in her 50s who had worked for him since he had inherited the ranch from his uncle 3 years prior. She came running from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and her eyes went wide when she saw what he carried. "Dios mío," Maria breathed, hurrying to open the door wider. "Bring her to the guest room quickly." Yates did as instructed, carrying the woman through the cool interior of the adobe house and into the small bedroom that rarely saw use. He laid her gently on the quilt-covered bed, and Maria immediately began fussing over her, checking her forehead for fever and clucking her tongue disapprovingly. "She is severely dehydrated," Maria announced after a moment, "and malnourished, I would guess. When did you find her?" "Just now, by the cottonwood at the east boundary," Yates replied, running a hand through his dark hair. At 28, he had been running the ranch alone for long enough that he had grown accustomed to the solitude, but the sight of this woman stirred something protective in him that he could not quite name. There was no one else around, no wagon, no horse, nothing. Someone must have left her there on purpose. Maria's expression darkened. What kind of monster abandons a woman in her condition? She cannot be more than a few weeks from her time. Yates felt his jaw tighten. He had seen his share of cruelty in his years, both during his brief time fighting in skirmishes against raiding parties and in the hard scrabble life of ranching on the border, but this felt particularly vicious. "Can you help her?" "I will do what I can," Maria said, already moving to fetch water and cloths. "But she needs rest and food. Go, let me tend to her. You have work to do, and I will call you if there is any change." Yates hesitated, his eyes lingering on the woman's pale face, but finally nodded and left the room. He found himself unable to focus on his usual tasks for the rest of the afternoon, his mind constantly drifting back to the unconscious woman in his guest room. Who was she? Where had she come from? And most importantly, who had abandoned her? It was nearly evening when Maria found him in the barn, ostensibly checking on the horses but really just killing time. "She is awake," Maria said simply, and Yates dropped the brush he had been using on Copper's coat and hurried toward the house. The woman was sitting up in bed when he entered, propped against pillows, a cup of water clutched in her trembling hands. Her eyes, he noticed immediately, were a striking shade of green, like new grass after a rare spring rain. They widened slightly when she saw him, and he could read the fear there as clearly as words on a page. "You are safe here," Yates said quickly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "My name is Yates Ashford. This is my ranch. I found you by the cottonwood tree this afternoon." "Can you tell me your name?" The woman stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing her options, deciding how much to trust him. Finally, she spoke, her voice hoarse from lack of use. "Beatrice. Beatrice Dalton." "Miss Dalton," Yates said, pulling a chair closer to the bed and sitting down so he would not tower over her. "Can you tell me what happened to you? How did you end up out there alone?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears and she looked down at her hands. "He left me," she whispered. "James. We were supposed to be married. We were traveling from San Antonio to El Paso, and when I told him I was with child, he said he would take care of everything. But then last night, we camped near here, and when I woke up this morning, he was gone. The wagon, the horses, everything. He left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a canteen of water, which I dropped somewhere along the way when I was trying to walk." Yates felt that same surge of anger he had experienced earlier, but he kept his voice calm. "This James, what is his full name?" "James Fletcher," Beatrice said, and there was such bitter pain in her voice that Yates wanted to hunt the man down immediately. "I thought he loved me. I thought we were going to have a life together. I was such a fool." "You were not a fool," Yates said firmly. "He was a coward and a scoundrel, and you deserve better than that." Beatrice looked up at him then, surprise evident on her face as though she had not expected kindness from a stranger. "I do not know what I am going to do," she admitted. "I have no money, no family. My parents died 2 years ago, and I have been working as a seamstress in San Antonio. James was a customer, and he swept me off my feet with his promises. I have nothing and no one." Something shifted in Yates's chest as he looked at this young woman, alone and frightened, and carrying a child that would soon need a name and a future. He had been alone for so long, married to his ranch and his solitude, that he had forgotten what it felt like to want to protect someone, to care about another person's welfare beyond the basic human decency he would show anyone. But looking at Beatrice Dalton, he felt something awaken in him that he had thought long dead. "That child will have my name," Yates heard himself say, the words surprising him even as they left his mouth. Beatrice's eyes went wide. "What?" "That child will have my name," Yates repeated, more firmly this time. "And so will you if you will have it. Marry me, Miss Dalton. I am not a rich man, but I have this ranch and I can provide for you and your baby. No child should come into this world without a name or a father to claim it, and no woman should have to face that alone." "You do not even know me," Beatrice protested, though he could see hope flickering in her eyes, warring with disbelief. "Why would you do this?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Yates said simply. "And because I have been alone on this ranch for 3 years, and maybe it is time that changed. I am not asking for a love match, Miss Dalton. I am offering you security and a name for your child. What happens after that, we can figure out together." Beatrice was silent for a long moment, her hand moving unconsciously to rest on her swollen belly. Yates could see the thoughts racing behind her eyes, the calculations and the fears and the desperate hope. Finally, She looked up at him and nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Mr. Ashford, and I swear I will do everything I can to be a good wife to you and to earn this incredible kindness you are showing me." Yates felt a smile tug at his lips, the first genuine one he had worn in longer than he could remember. "Call me Yates, please, and we will figure this out together, Beatrice. You are not alone anymore." Over the next few days, as Beatrice regained her strength under Maria's careful attention, Yates found himself spending more and more time at the house rather than out on the range. He told himself it was simply to make sure Beatrice was comfortable and had everything she needed, but the truth was that he found himself drawn to her in a way he had not expected. She was quiet and careful at first, as though afraid to take up too much space or ask for too much, but gradually she began to relax. They would sit together in the evenings on the front porch, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of orange and gold, and talk. Beatrice told him about her childhood in a small town outside San Antonio, about her parents who had died in a fever epidemic, about her work as a seamstress, and the quiet life she had led before James Fletcher had walked into the shop where she worked. Yates, in turn, told her about growing up on his uncle's ranch, about learning to work cattle and fix fences and raid the land, about the loneliness he had felt since his uncle's death had left him the sole inhabitant of this house that seemed too big for just one person. "I always thought I would have a family by now," Yates admitted one evening, surprising himself with the confession. "I am 28, and I have been so focused on keeping this ranch running that I never took the time to court anyone properly. There are not many unmarried women in Presidio anyway, and the ones that are here have their pick of suitors. A quiet rancher with more cattle than conversation skills does not exactly stand out." Beatrice looked at him thoughtfully. "I think you sell yourself short, Yates. You have been nothing but kind and patient with me, and that is worth more than all the pretty words in the world. James could talk a blue streak, promising me the moon and the stars, and look where that got me. You have given me more with your actions in a few days than he ever did with all his promises." Yates felt heat rise to his cheeks, unused to such direct praise. "I am just doing what is right." "No," Beatrice said softly. "You are doing far more than that, and I want you to know that I see it." "I am grateful, Yates, more than I can ever properly express." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Presidio, with Maria and the local priest as witnesses. Beatrice wore a dress that Maria had helped her alter from one found in a trunk that had belonged to Yates's aunt, and Yates wore his best shirt and the clean trousers he usually reserved for trips into town. The ceremony was brief and straightforward, but when Yates slipped a simple gold band onto Beatrice's finger, he felt the weight of the promise he was making settle onto his shoulders like a comfortable yoke. Beatrice became Beatrice Ashford that day, and the child she carried would be born with the Ashford name, legitimate and claimed. As they rode back to the ranch in the wagon, Yates driving and Beatrice seated beside him, he caught her glancing at the ring on her finger with an expression of wonder and relief. He reached over and squeezed her hand gently, and she looked up at him with a smile that made something in his chest tighten. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Beatrice took over some of the lighter household tasks from Maria, who was grateful for the help, and Yates found himself looking forward to coming back to the house each evening to find Beatrice there, usually with supper ready and a smile on her face. She was careful not to overexert herself given her condition, but she seemed to bloom with proper food and rest, the hollow look fading from her face and a healthy glow replacing it. They had agreed before the marriage that Yates would not claim the rights of a husband in the bedroom, at least not yet. It was to be a marriage of convenience and protection, and Yates had no intention of pressuring Beatrice into anything she was not ready for. He took to sleeping on a cot in his study, leaving the main bedroom to Beatrice, and if he sometimes lay awake at night thinking about the woman down the hall, he kept those thoughts to himself. But as the weeks passed and October gave way to November, Yates found his feelings shifting in ways he had not anticipated. It was in the small things, the way Beatrice laughed at his dry observations about the ranch hands who came by occasionally to help with larger tasks, the way she hummed while she worked in the kitchen, the way her eyes lit up when she saw him ride in at the end of the day. He had thought he was simply doing his duty, providing protection and a name, but somewhere along the way, he had started to care for her in a way that went far beyond obligation. One evening in mid-November, as they sat together after supper, Beatrice suddenly gasped and grabbed Yates's hand, pressing it to her belly. "Feel that," she said, her face alight with wonder. "The baby is kicking." Yates felt the flutter of movement beneath his palm and was struck by the reality of it all. This was a life growing inside Beatrice, a child that would soon be born and would call him father. He looked up at Beatrice and saw tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. "I am more than all right," Beatrice said, laughing through her tears. "I am happy, Yates. For the first time in months, I am truly happy. I have a home and a husband who treats me with kindness, and soon I will have a baby. I thought my life was over when James left me, but instead, I think it was just beginning." Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I am glad," he managed to say. "I want you to be happy here, Beatrice. I want this to be a real home for you." Beatrice looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "It already is," she said softly. "And you have already become so much more to me than just a name on a marriage certificate, Yates. I need you to know that." They sat there in the lamplight, his hand still resting on her belly, feeling the baby kick and move, and Yates felt something settle into place inside him. He was falling in love with his wife, this woman he had married out of duty and compassion. He did not know when it had happened exactly, whether it was the first time he had found her or somewhere in the quiet evenings they had shared, but it was undeniable now. He loved her. "Beatrice," he started to say, but she shook her head. "Not yet," she said gently. "I can see what you are thinking, and I feel it too, but let us take our time. We have rushed into enough already. Let us just be together and see where it leads." Yates nodded, understanding her need for caution. She had been burned badly by James Fletcher, and he would not push her into something she was not ready for. But as they sat together in comfortable silence, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this marriage of convenience could become something more. Winter settled over Presidio with the suddenness that was common in that part of Texas, the days growing shorter and the nights carrying a chill that necessitated fires in the hearth. Beatrice grew larger with each passing week, and Maria fussed over her constantly, making sure she was eating enough and resting properly. Yates watched over her with equal concern, though he tried to be less obvious about it. In early December, during one of the cold snaps that occasionally swept through the area, Yates came back from checking on the cattle to find Beatrice sitting in front of the fire, knitting something small and white. She looked up when he entered, her face glowing in the firelight, and held up her work for him to see. "I am making a blanket for the baby," she explained. "Maria taught me the pattern. I want everything to be ready when the time comes." Yates hung his coat and hat by the door and came to sit beside her. "That is beautiful work," he said honestly, admiring the neat stitches. "Have you thought about names?" Beatrice hesitated, her hand stilling in her lap. "I have been thinking about it, yes." If it is a boy, I was hoping we might name him after your uncle, the one who left you the ranch." "What was his name?" "William," Yates said, surprised and touched by the suggestion. "William Ashford. He was a good man, and I owe him everything I have." "Then William it is if we have a son," Beatrice said with a smile. "And if it is a girl, I would like to name her Rose after my mother." "William or Rose Ashford," Yates said, testing the names. "I like them both." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the soft click of Beatrice's knitting needles. Then Beatrice spoke again, her voice quiet but clear. "I need to tell you something, Yates. I have been thinking about this for weeks now, and I cannot keep it to myself any longer." Yates felt a flutter of concern in his chest. "What is it?" Beatrice set down her knitting and turned to face him fully. "When you asked me to marry you, you said it was not a love match. You said you were offering me security and a name for my child, and I accepted those terms gratefully. But somewhere along the way, something changed for me. I have come to care for you deeply, Yates, more than I thought possible in such a short time. I do not expect you to feel the same way, and I do not want to make things uncomfortable between us, but I needed you to know the truth. I am falling in love with you." Yates felt his heart slam against his ribs as her words sank in. "Beatrice," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been wanting to say the same thing to you for weeks now, but I did not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated. I am in love with you. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you lying under that cottonwood tree, and every day since then has only made it stronger." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Truly, truly," Yates confirmed. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled down her cheeks. "I love you, Beatrice Ashford. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you work. I love the life we are building together, and I cannot imagine my days without you in them anymore." "I love you too," Beatrice whispered, and then she was leaning forward and kissing him, her lips soft and warm against his. Yates wrapped his arms around her carefully, mindful of her belly, and kissed her back with all the emotion he had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice rested her forehead against his. "I think I want you to move back into the bedroom," she said softly. "If you want to, that is. I do not want us to be apart anymore." "Are you sure?" Yates asked, searching her face. "I do not want to rush you into anything." "I am sure," Beatrice said firmly. "You are my husband, Yates, and I want us to be truly married in every sense of the word. I trust you, and I love you, and I am ready." That night, Yates moved his belongings back into the bedroom he had vacated on their wedding night, and he and Beatrice lay together in the darkness, her back pressed against his chest, and his arm draped protectively over her belly. They did not make love, not with the baby so near to coming and Beatrice needing her rest, but the intimacy of simply holding each other was enough. Yates fell asleep with his face buried in her hair, breathing in the scent of the lavender soap she used, and feeling more content than he had in his entire life. Christmas came and went quietly, with Yates giving Beatrice a beautiful shawl he had ridden all the way to Fort Davis to purchase, and Beatrice giving him a shirt she had sewn herself, with neat, careful stitches that spoke of hours of work. They celebrated with Maria, eating a special meal and singing carols by the fire, and Yates found himself thinking that this was what he had always wanted without realizing it. A home filled with warmth and love and the promise of family. The new year of 1875 arrived with little fanfare, and with it came the awareness that Beatrice's time was drawing near. Maria had been consulting with the local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson who lived in Presidio and had delivered half the babies in the area. She came out to the ranch in mid-January to check on Beatrice and declared that everything looked as it should. "The baby is positioned well," Mrs. Henderson told them after her examination. "And you are healthy and strong, Mrs. Ashford. I expect it will be any day now. Make sure you send for me the moment the pains start, and I will come as quickly as I can." Yates took to staying closer to the house after that, never venturing far in case Beatrice needed him. He could see the mixture of excitement and anxiety on her face as she waited, and he did his best to keep her distracted and calm. They played cards in the evenings, and he read to her from the collection of books his uncle had left behind. And they talked about the future, and all the things they wanted to teach their child. It was a cold night in late January when Beatrice woke him with a gentle shake, her face tight with pain. "Yates," she said quietly, "it is time." Yates was up and moving instantly, his heart pounding. He helped Beatrice into a chair and then rushed to wake Maria, who immediately began preparing the bedroom and boiling water. Yates himself rode hard into Presidio to fetch Mrs. Henderson, grateful for the bright moon that lit his way through the darkness. By the time they returned to the ranch, Beatrice's labor was well underway. Mrs. Henderson took charge immediately, and Yates found himself relegated to pacing in the front room, useless and anxious. Maria brought him coffee, which he drank without tasting, and the hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. He could hear Beatrice crying out occasionally from the bedroom, and each sound felt like a knife to his heart. Dawn was breaking over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, when he finally heard a different sound, the thin, reedy wail of a newborn baby. Yates was on his feet instantly, his entire body tense as he waited for someone to tell him what was happening. It felt like an eternity before Maria emerged from the bedroom, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy baby boy, and Beatrice is doing well. You can go in now." Yates did not remember crossing the distance to the bedroom, but suddenly he was there, standing in the doorway and looking at the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. Beatrice was propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in the white blanket she had knitted. She looked up when she saw him, and her smile could have lit up the entire room. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Yates approached the bed on legs that felt unsteady and looked down at the baby in Beatrice's arms. He was small and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were squeezed tightly shut. Yates felt his breath catch in his throat as he looked at this tiny person, this life that was now his responsibility and his privilege to raise. "He is perfect," Yates managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "You did so well, Beatrice. I am so proud of you. Would you like to hold him?" Beatrice asked, and at Yates's hesitant nod, she carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Yates had held newborn calves and foals, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling of holding this baby, his son. The boy was so light and fragile, and Yates was terrified he might break him, but as he cradled him close, the baby let out a small sigh and seemed to settle against his chest. Yates felt tears prick at his eyes as he looked down at the tiny face. "Hello, William," he said softly. "Welcome to the world, son. I promise I will do everything in my power to be a good father to you." Beatrice reached out and took Yates's hand, squeezing it gently. "You already are," she said. "From the moment you said his name would be yours, you were already his father. And now here we are, a real family." Yates carefully returned William to Beatrice's arms and then leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I love you," he said. "Thank you for this incredible gift." "I love you too," Beatrice replied, her eyes drifting closed with exhaustion. "And thank you for saving us, Yates. Thank you for giving us a life." As Yates left the room to let Beatrice rest, he felt as though his heart might burst with the fullness of his emotions. He had started this journey as a lonely rancher, content with his solitude, and now he had a wife he loved more than he had thought possible, and a son to raise and teach and watch grow. Life had given him a gift he had not known to ask for, and he would spend the rest of his days being grateful for it. The first few weeks with William were a blur of sleepless nights and constant learning. Yates had thought he knew what exhaustion was from long days of ranch work, but nothing compared to being woken every few hours by a crying baby. Yet he found he did not mind, especially when he would watch Beatrice nurse William in the rocking chair by the window, her face soft with love and exhaustion, and feel such overwhelming tenderness that it almost hurt. He took to doing more work around the house so that Beatrice could focus on caring for William, and Maria, bless her, seemed to have endless energy and experience when it came to babies. She showed both Beatrice and Yates how to change nappies and swaddle properly and interpret the different types of cries that William produced. Slowly, they all settled into a routine. Spring came to the desert with its usual explosion of wildflowers, and Yates would often carry William outside in the mornings to show him the world he had been born into. The baby was too young to understand, of course, but Yates talked to him anyway, pointing out the cattle in the distant pastures and the hawks circling overhead and the mountains that stood like sentinels on the horizon. "Someday all of this will be yours," Yates told William one morning as they stood on the porch, the baby tucked securely in the crook of his arm. "And I will teach you everything you need to know to care for it, how to read the weather and fix a fence and treat the animals with respect. But more importantly, I will teach you how to be a good man, how to treat people with kindness and keep your word and stand up for what is right." Beatrice had come to stand beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. "You are going to be an amazing father," she said. "You already are." "I hope so," Yates replied. "I want him to have everything I did not, a real family and a stable home and parents who love him." "He has all of that already," Beatrice said softly, "and so do I. I wake up sometimes and have to remind myself that this is real, that I really do have this life. When I think about where I was just 6 months ago, alone and abandoned and terrified, and then I look at where I am now, it feels like a miracle." Yates turned to kiss her, careful not to jostle William. "It feels like a miracle to me too. I spent so long alone on this ranch, and I had convinced myself that I was fine with it, that I did not need anyone else. But you and William have shown me what I was missing. You have given my life meaning beyond just surviving." They stood there together, the three of them, watching the sun climb higher in the sky and feeling the warmth of the new day on their faces. Yates thought about that day back in September when he had found Beatrice by the cottonwood tree, how he had acted on instinct and compassion without thinking about what it might mean for his future. It had been the best decision he had ever made. As William grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, and he seemed to have inherited Beatrice's green eyes and Yates's dark hair. He was fascinated by everything, his gaze following movement and light with intense concentration. Yates found himself utterly charmed by his son, by the way William would grab at his finger with surprising strength, and the way he would coo and babble as though trying to hold a conversation. One evening in early June, as they sat together after supper with William playing on a blanket on the floor, Beatrice brought up something that had clearly been on her mind. "Yates, I have been thinking about something, and I wanted to discuss it with you," she said carefully. "What is it?" Yates asked, looking up from where he had been making faces at William to elicit giggles. "I know that William is not your blood, even though he has your name," Beatrice said, her voice quiet. "And I want you to know that I understand if you ever feel differently about him because of that. But I need to tell you that as far as I am concerned, you are his father in every way that matters. James may have contributed to his creation, but you are the one who is raising him and loving him, and I do not ever want William to know any different." Yates felt his chest tighten with emotion. He set aside the toy he had been holding and moved to sit beside Beatrice on the sofa, taking her hands in his. "Beatrice, look at me. William is my son. I do not care about blood or biology. From the moment I said that child would have my name, he became mine. I love him as though I had fathered him myself, and nothing will ever change that. He will grow up knowing that I am his father and that I chose him and you, deliberately and completely." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "I needed to hear that. I have been so worried that you might come to resent us, that you might regret this decision you made so quickly." "Never," Yates said firmly. "Not for one single moment have I regretted it. You and William are the best things that have ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that I found you when I did. You are my family, Beatrice, my real family, and I will love and protect you both for the rest of my life." Beatrice leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet, and Yates wrapped his arms around her and held her close. William made a loud babbling sound from his blanket, as though commenting on the scene, and they both laughed and pulled apart to look at him. "I think he approves," Beatrice said with a smile. "I should hope so," Yates replied. "After all, he is stuck with us now." As summer progressed, life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Yates hired on a couple of ranch hands to help with the increased workload, and Beatrice slowly regained her strength and energy. She took to ranch life with surprising ease, learning to help with tasks like churning butter and preserving fruits and vegetables from the small garden Maria had maintained for years. Yates loved watching her work, loved the way she attacked every task with determination, and the way she would push her hair back from her face when she was concentrating. Their physical relationship had deepened after William's birth, once Beatrice had healed and Mrs. Henderson had given them the all-clear. Yates was patient and gentle, always mindful of her needs and comfort, and Beatrice responded with a passion that surprised them both. They would lie together in the darkness after, talking softly about their days and their hopes for the future, and Yates would think that he had never been so happy in his entire life. One night in late July, as they lay tangled in the sheets with the window open to catch any hint of a breeze, Beatrice traced lazy patterns on Yates's chest and said, "I want to have more children with you. Not right away, of course, but someday. I want William to have siblings, and I want to give you a child that is yours from the start." Yates caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "William is mine from the start as far as I am concerned, but I would love to have more children with you, whenever you are ready. I love being a father and I love watching you be a mother. You are so good at it." "You are good at it too," Beatrice said. "Better than I think you give yourself credit for. William adores you. Have you noticed how his whole face lights up when you come into the room?" Yates had noticed, and it never failed to make his heart swell with pride and love. "He is an easy baby to love." "He is," Beatrice agreed. "But he is lucky to have you as his father, Yates. I hope he grows up to be just like you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Yates dreamed of a house full of children and a future stretching out before them full of promise and possibility. As autumn arrived and the temperature finally began to cool, Yates found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed in just over a year. This time last year, he had been alone, going through the motions of running the ranch without any real joy or purpose beyond simple survival. Now he had Beatrice and William, and every day felt full and meaningful. He worked harder than ever, driven by the desire to provide for his family and secure their future, but it never felt like a burden because he knew what he was working toward. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after he and Beatrice had married, Yates surprised her with a gift. It was a simple locket on a gold chain, and inside he had placed a tiny sketch of William that he had commissioned from a traveling artist who had passed through Presidio the month before. Beatrice opened the locket with trembling hands and gasped when she saw the miniature portrait. "Yates, this is beautiful. How did you manage this?" "I wanted you to have something special for our anniversary," Yates explained. "I know this year has not been easy with the baby and everything else, but I wanted you to know how much I appreciate you and love you. You have made my life better in every possible way." Beatrice threw her arms around his neck and kissed him soundly. "I love it, and I love you. This year has been the best year of my life, despite everything, or maybe because of everything. I would not change a single thing." "Not even the part where you were abandoned in the desert?" Yates asked with a raised eyebrow. "Not even that," Beatrice said firmly. "Because if that had not happened, I would never have met you, and I cannot imagine my life without you now." They held each other for a long moment, swaying slightly in the morning light, until William's cry from the bedroom broke the spell. Beatrice went to tend to him, and Yates stood there in the kitchen, feeling the weight of the locket box in his pocket and thinking about how strange and wonderful life could be. Winter came again, and with it, the quiet months where ranch work slowed and families turned inward. Yates spent more time in the house, playing with William, who was now crawling and getting into everything, and helping Beatrice with the 1,000 small tasks that filled their days. Maria, who had become like family to all of them, often joined them for meals, and the house was filled with warmth and laughter. It was during a snowstorm in January, rare for that part of Texas but not unheard of, that Beatrice told Yates she was pregnant again. They were sitting by the fire, William asleep upstairs and the wind howling outside, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have another baby," she said softly. "I am about 2 months along, I think." Yates felt his eyes go wide with surprise and then joy. "Truly, another baby, truly," Beatrice confirmed, her face glowing. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Yates pulled her into his arms, careful but enthusiastic. "I am thrilled. This is wonderful news, Beatrice. Another child. William is going to be a big brother." "I hope he is not too jealous," Beatrice said with a laugh. "He is so used to being the center of attention." "He will adjust," Yates said confidently, "and we will help him. When is the baby due?" "August, I believe, so we have plenty of time to prepare." Yates spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about how they would need to set up a nursery and get more baby things and prepare William for his new role. Beatrice watched him with amusement and love, her hand resting on her belly where their child was growing. This pregnancy was different from the first in that Beatrice was not alone and terrified, but surrounded by love and support. Yates was attentive to her every need, and Maria fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate well and did not overwork herself. William, now walking and talking in simple words, seemed to sense that something was different, though he could not articulate what. As spring turned to summer, Beatrice's belly grew round again, and Yates found himself falling even more in love with her. She was beautiful pregnant, with her skin glowing and her hair thick and shiny. She complained sometimes about being uncomfortable, especially in the heat, but she did it with good humor and grace. In mid-August, when the summer heat was at its most oppressive, Beatrice went into labor again. This time, Yates was less panicked, having been through it before, but no less anxious. Mrs. Henderson came quickly, and the labor progressed faster than it had with William. By late afternoon, they had a daughter, tiny and perfect with a tuft of blonde hair and blue eyes that would likely change color in the coming weeks. Yates held her with the same sense of awe he had felt with William, this tiny person who was half him and half Beatrice. She was so small, even smaller than William had been, and she had Beatrice's delicate features. He felt his heart expand to make room for this new love, this daughter who would wrap him around her little finger. "Rose," Beatrice said from the bed, her voice tired but content. "Her name is Rose." "Rose Ashford," Yates said, testing it out. "It is perfect. She is perfect. You are amazing, Beatrice." William was brought in to meet his sister, and though he was clearly confused by this new small person, he seemed intrigued. He reached out to touch her hand with surprising gentleness, and Rose wrapped her tiny fingers around his, and Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion at the sight of his two children together. The years that followed were full and busy and happy. Yates worked the ranch with the help of his hired hands, slowly building it into one of the more successful operations in the area. Beatrice managed the household with skill and grace, and together they raised their children with love and discipline. William grew into a curious, energetic boy who followed Yates everywhere and peppered him with endless questions. Rose, as expected, had Yates wrapped around her finger from day one and used her charm to get away with things her brother never could. When William was 5 and Rose was 3, Beatrice gave birth to twin boys, much to everyone's surprise. They named them Thomas and John, and suddenly the house that had once seemed too big for one person was bursting at the seams with life and noise and chaos. Yates hired more help to handle the increased workload of both the ranch and the household. And Maria, now well into her 60s, moved into a room in the house permanently to help with the children. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, Yates had never been happier. He loved coming home to a house full of children's laughter, and the smell of Beatrice's cooking, and the knowledge that he was building something lasting and meaningful. He and Beatrice still made time for each other, stealing quiet moments on the porch after the children were asleep, or taking rides together on Sunday afternoons when Maria could watch the little ones. One evening, when the twins were about 2 years old and the older children were playing outside in the fading light, Beatrice and Yates sat together on the porch swing, watching their family. "You ever think about that day when you found me?" Beatrice asked, her head resting on Yates's shoulder. "Sometimes," Yates admitted. "I think about how different both of our lives would be if I had ridden a different route that day or if I had decided to check the fences the next morning instead." "I think about it too," Beatrice said. "And I think about James sometimes, though not with anger anymore. I am grateful to him in a strange way because his cruelty led me to you. If he had not abandoned me, I would never have found this life, this family. I would never have known what real love feels like." "I am grateful too," Yates said. "Grateful that you needed help and that I was in a position to give it. Grateful that you took a chance on a lonely rancher with more land than sense. Grateful for every day we have had together and every day still to come." William came running up to the porch then, followed by Rose, both of them talking over each other about something they had found in the garden. Yates listened to their excited chatter with a smile, fielding questions and offering observations, and felt Beatrice's hand slip into his. This was his life now, full and rich and messy and perfect. He was no longer the lonely rancher working a piece of land with no one to share it with. He was a husband and a father, a provider and a protector, and every single day he woke up grateful for the choice he had made to offer Beatrice and her unborn child his name. As the children grew older, Yates made sure that William knew the truth about his birth. It was a conversation he and Beatrice had discussed many times, deciding that honesty was the best policy, but that it needed to be handled with care. When William was 10 years old, Yates took him out riding one afternoon, just the two of them, and told him the story of how Beatrice had come to the ranch. William listened in silence, his young face serious, and when Yates finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "So you are not my real father." "I am your real father in every way that matters," Yates said firmly. "The man who helped create you abandoned your mother when she needed him most. I chose you, William. I chose to be your father and to give you my name and to raise you as my son. That makes me more your father than any accident of biology ever could." William thought about this, his brow furrowed. "Do you love me less than the others? Because I am not really yours." "Never," Yates said, his voice fierce. "I love you just as much as I love Rose and Thomas and John. You are my firstborn son, William, and I am proud of the young man you are becoming. Nothing will ever change that." William nodded slowly, and then, to Yates's surprise, he reached over and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for choosing us," he said, his voice muffled against Yates's shirt. "Thank you for being my father." Yates held his son and felt tears prick at his eyes. "It has been my honor," he said softly, "and it always will be." After that conversation, if anything, William seemed even closer to Yates, as though the honesty had strengthened their bond rather than weakening it. He continued to follow Yates around the ranch, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and the land, and Yates taught him with patience and pride. The years continued to pass in the way they do, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The ranch prospered, and Yates was able to buy additional land and increase their herd. Beatrice became known in Presidio as a kind and capable woman, always willing to help neighbors in need and active in the small church they attended. The children grew healthy and strong, each developing their own personalities and interests. Rose, true to form, was as stubborn as she was charming, with a quick wit and a fearless nature that sometimes gave Yates heart palpitations. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, more interested in books than cattle, and Yates encouraged his academic pursuits even as he taught him the practical skills he would need. John was the wild one, always climbing things and getting into scrapes, but with a heart as big as the Texas sky. When Beatrice turned 32, 6 years after the twins were born, she told Yates that she thought she might be pregnant again. Sure enough, 9 months later, she gave birth to their last child, another daughter they named Grace. She was a calm, easy baby, and Beatrice said she was grateful for that given that she now had 6 children to manage. Yates sometimes looked around at his full house and marveled at how his life had turned out. He was 41 years old, with a thriving ranch and a wife he loved more with each passing year and 6 children who brought him endless joy and occasional frustration. It was more than he had ever imagined for himself, more than he had ever dared to hope for during those lonely years after his uncle's death. One evening, after the children were finally all in bed and the house was quiet, Beatrice came to find Yates in his study, where he was going over the ranch accounts. She wrapped her arms around him from behind and rested her chin on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Yates replied honestly. "How different my life could have been if I had not found you that day. How empty and pointless it all seemed before you and the children." "I think about that too," Beatrice said. "And I think about how brave you were to take on a pregnant stranger and her child with no questions asked. Not many men would have done that, Yates. You saved my life, and you gave William a future he would never have had otherwise." "You saved my life too," Yates said, turning in his chair to face her. "I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You taught me how to really live, how to love and be loved. You gave me a reason to build something lasting instead of just surviving day to day." Beatrice cupped his face in her hands and kissed him gently. "We saved each other then, and we have built a beautiful life together, you and I. I would not change a single thing, Yates Ashford, not one single thing." They stood there in the quiet study, holding each other and listening to the sounds of their house settling around them, the occasional creak of floorboards, and the distant sound of one of the children murmuring in sleep. This was their life, the one they had built together from that moment of compassion and courage on a hot September afternoon. As William grew into a young man, he took on more responsibility on the ranch, working alongside Yates with the skill and dedication of someone who truly loved the land. He had grown tall and strong, with Yates's dark hair and Beatrice's green eyes, and Yates felt enormous pride watching him work. Rose, at 16, was already turning heads in Presidio, though Yates tried not to think too hard about that. She had her mother's beauty and her father's stubborn streak, a combination that meant she would not be easily won. The twins, now 15, were preparing to go away to school in San Antonio, something that filled Beatrice with both pride and sadness. Thomas wanted to be a lawyer, drawn to books and learning in a way that was different from his siblings, and Yates supported the dream even though it meant losing his son to the city. John was less certain about his future, but was considering studying to be a veterinarian, his love of animals making it a natural fit. Grace, the baby at 9 years old, was still very much a child, more interested in playing with dolls and helping Maria in the kitchen than in thinking about her future. Yates indulged her shamelessly, as he had with all his daughters, unable to resist their pleas and charms. One spring day, when Yates was 52 years old and Beatrice was 43, they took a rare day away from the ranch and rode out to the cottonwood tree where he had first found her. It was something they did occasionally, a pilgrimage of sorts to the place where their story had begun. The tree had grown in the years since, its branches thicker and its shade deeper, and Yates had built a small bench beneath it years ago. They sat together on the bench, shoulders touching, and looked out at the land that had become their home. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and well-tended, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. In the distance, they could see cattle grazing and the roof of the ranch house, where their children were going about their various activities. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Beatrice asked softly. "When I told you I had nothing and no one. That child will have my name," Yates quoted, the words as clear in his memory as if he had spoken them yesterday. "I remember. It was the truest thing I had ever said." "You gave us more than a name," Beatrice said. "You gave us a life, a family, a future. You gave us love when I thought I would never trust anyone again. You are the best man I have ever known, Yates Ashford." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Yates replied. "Finding you here, bringing you home, watching you become my wife and the mother of my children, it has all been the greatest privilege of my life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a hawk circle overhead and listening to the wind rustle through the cottonwood leaves. Then Beatrice spoke again. "I hope the children understand how precious this is, what we have built. I hope they know that family is not always about blood, but about the choices we make and the love we give. William knows that, I think, but I want all of them to understand it." "They will," Yates assured her. "We have taught them well, you and I. They have seen what real love looks like, what real commitment means. They will carry those lessons with them wherever life takes them." As they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, Yates felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. His life had not turned out the way he had expected, but it had turned out better than he ever could have imagined. He had a wife who was his partner and his love, children who brought him joy, and a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. William married a girl from Presidio when he was 23, a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah who fit into the family seamlessly. They built a house on the far side of the ranch property and began their own family, making Yates and Beatrice grandparents for the first time. Rose eventually married as well, though not until she was 25 and had thoroughly vetted every potential suitor in 3 counties. She chose a rancher from Fort Davis, a patient man named Michael, who seemed to genuinely appreciate her independent spirit. They settled on his family's ranch, and Rose threw herself into ranch life with the same determination she brought to everything. Thomas became a successful lawyer in San Antonio, just as he had planned, and John did indeed become a veterinarian, though he chose to practice in smaller towns rather than the city, riding from ranch to treat animals. Grace, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Presidio that served the children of ranchers and townspeople alike. Through it all, Yates and Beatrice remained the center of their growing family, hosting Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, and providing wisdom and support to their children and grandchildren. They grew older together, their hair going gray and their steps slowing, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, strengthened by shared memories and the knowledge that they had built something lasting. On their 30th wedding anniversary, with all their children and many of their grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration, Yates stood to make a toast. The house was full and loud, with children running around and adults talking and laughing, and he had to whistle to get everyone's attention. "I want to say something," Yates began, feeling slightly self-conscious with all eyes on him. 30 years ago today, I married the woman who saved my life. I know everyone thinks I saved her, finding her out there by the cottonwood tree and giving her and William a home. But the truth is, she saved me. She took a lonely, stubborn rancher and taught him how to love and be loved. She filled this house with laughter and warmth and turned it into a real home. She gave me 6 incredible children and showed me every day what true strength and grace look like. He looked at Beatrice, who had tears streaming down her face, and felt his own eyes fill. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, Beatrice Ashford, but I thank God for you every single day. You are my heart and my home, and I love you more now than I did on the day we married, which I would not have thought possible." The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Beatrice came to stand beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I love you too," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every single moment." They kissed, to the catcalls and laughter of their family, and Yates thought that this was what happiness looked like. Not just the big moments, but all the small ones in between, the daily choice to love and be loved, to build something together that would outlast them both. As Yates entered his 60s, he gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to William, who had proven himself more than capable of running things. Yates still helped out when he could, but he also took more time to simply enjoy the life he had built. He and Beatrice would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over their land, and talk about their plans for their remaining years. "I want to travel a bit," Beatrice said one evening. "Not far, but I would like to see some of the places we have always talked about. San Antonio, maybe Dallas, perhaps even up to Denver to see those mountains you have always described." "Then we will go," Yates said simply. "Whatever you want, we will make it happen." And they did. They took trips to the cities Beatrice wanted to see, marveling at how much the world was changing as the 19th century drew to a close. They visited their scattered children and delighted in meeting new grandchildren. But they always came back to the ranch, to the home they had built together and the land that had sustained them. One quiet morning in late spring, when Yates was 68 and Beatrice was 59, they rode out to the cottonwood tree one last time. Yates had been feeling his age lately, the aches and pains of a life spent working hard catching up with him, and he wanted to see the place where it had all begun once more. They sat on the bench beneath the spreading branches, and Yates took Beatrice's hand, noting how lined and weathered it had become over the years, so different from the soft hand of the young woman he had found here so long ago. "You have any regrets?" he asked her. Beatrice was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Then she shook her head. "Not a single one. My life has been so much richer and fuller than I ever imagined it could be. I have been loved and cherished. I have raised 6 beautiful children, and I have built something lasting with a man I respect and adore. How could I have any regrets?" "Good," Yates said, satisfied. "I have none either. Finding you here was the best thing that ever happened to me, and everything that came after has been a gift." They sat together in the shade of the old cottonwood, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that defied expectations. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed to her calf. This was their world, their legacy, the love story that had started with an act of compassion and grown into something extraordinary. As the years continued to pass, and their grandchildren had children of their own, the story of how Yates and Beatrice met became family legend, passed down through the generations. The tale of the pregnant girl who was abandoned and the lonely rancher who found her and gave her child his name became a touchstone for the family, a reminder of the power of compassion and the strength of love. Yates and Beatrice lived into their 70s, surrounded by family and secure in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. When Yates finally passed away at 76, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Beatrice beside him as she had been for over 4 decades. She followed him less than a year later, as though unable to bear being separated from him for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a stone that simply read, "Yates and Beatrice Ashford, together forever." William, now in his 50s and with grandchildren of his own, stood at the funeral and told the story one more time of how his father had found his mother and declared that her child would have his name. "He was not my biological father," William said to the gathered family. "But he was my father in every way that mattered. He chose me, chose us, and that choice changed everything. He taught me what it means to be a good man, to keep your word, and to love without reservation. I hope I have passed those lessons on to my own children, and that they will pass them on to theirs." The ranch continued under William's stewardship and eventually passed to his children, and then their children, each generation carrying on the legacy that Yates and Beatrice had begun. The cottonwood tree remained a special place for the family, a spot where couples would go to talk about their futures and where children would play in the shade, unaware of the significance it held. The love story of Yates and Beatrice Ashford became more than just a family tale. It became a testament to the power of choosing love, of seeing someone in need and acting with compassion, of building something lasting from the most unlikely of beginnings. It proved that family was not just about blood, but about the choices people made and the love they gave freely. In the end, that moment when Yates Ashford had looked at a desperate, pregnant young woman and said, "That child will have my name," had set in motion a cascade of love and life that would ripple through generations. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones we make from the heart, without thinking about cost or consequence, simply because it is the right thing to do. And somewhere in the quiet Texas night, if you listened carefully beneath the old cottonwood tree, you might almost hear the echo of a promise made long ago, a promise that had been kept faithfully until the very end and beyond. That child will have my name. And in having that name, he had gained a father, a family, and a legacy of love that would never be forgotten. The ranch still stands today, passed through the hands of Ashford descendants who remember the story and honor the love that built it. The cottonwood tree, ancient now, still provides shade on hot Texas days, and the land still stretches out toward the horizon, testament to the life that Yates and Beatrice built together from that chance meeting on a September afternoon in 1874. Their love story ended as all love stories must, with death and parting, but also with the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved completely. They had faced the world together, raised their children with strength and grace, and built something that would outlast them both. In the end, what more could anyone ask for than to love and be loved, to make a difference in the lives of others, and to leave the world a little better than they found it? Yates and Beatrice Ashford had done all of that and more, their story a shining example of what was possible when compassion met courage, and when love was given freely without expectation of return. They had started with nothing more than a desperate need and a generous heart, and they had built an empire of love that would stand the test of time.